Good morning. I'm Ben Ayers, Dean of the Terry College of Business, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our Terry Third Thursday. I'd like to thank our alumni board for putting together today's presentation as well as this entire series. Please also join me in thanking our corporate sponsor, Synovus, as well as our two media sponsors, the Atlanta Business Chronicle and Public Broadcasting Atlanta, WABE. Please join me in thanking them as well. Next month, we will take the month off from Terry Third Thursday, but we'll come back in January. However, next month, we will begin our Economic Outlook series in Atlanta. On December the 6th, we'll have Raphael Bostic, who is the president and CEO of the Atlanta Federal Reserve. We will meet at the Georgia Aquarium. He will provide the national forecast, and then I will be providing the state forecast. Again, that's on December the 6th. Registration is now open. If you would like to register for that event, it will be a great event, and hopefully we'll be all providing great news for 2019. But it's the website is terry.uga.edu/EO. After we finish up in Atlanta next month, then I will tour the state in January and February, hopefully sharing good news across the state about the economy for 2019. As some of you know, as Dean of the Terry College, I have the privilege of teaching a leadership class on campus. It's an undergraduate class. It's informally known as the Dear One Fellows program. It was started in 2010. Doug Ivester is the person behind this great program, and each semester we select 8 students to participate in the class, and then we spend a weekend in South Georgia at Deer Run for immersion into life, leadership, challenges, success. We have 8 students that participate in the program each year, and this morning we've got 2 of our students that are here. Hannah Thompson. Hannah will be graduating with a management and IB and English majors in summer of 2019. And Lauren Gascon, who is an MIS major, and she'll be graduating in spring. Hannah and Lauren, if you'll stand up and so everybody can see you. These are 2 outstanding students, and so I encourage you to meet them after today's presentation. They're going to do very, very well. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Alan Masarek. Alan joined Vonage in 2014 as its CEO and member of its board of directors. He is an innovator with deep experience in mobile, SMB, and enterprise sectors. Alan came to Vonage from Google, where he was director of Chrome and apps from June 2012 to October 2014, following the acquisition of his prior company, Quick Office, Inc. Alan co-founded Quick Office and served as its CEO. Under his leadership, it became the world's most widely embedded mobile productivity software. He also co-founded Ad Outlook, which is a marketplace for the media industry, and served as president of Advanced Health Corporation. Alan is a proud Terry alum. He's also a graduate from the Harvard Business School's MBA program. Please join me in welcoming Alan Masarek.
Thank you, Ben. Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here with you this morning. It's not without its pressure. So Jim Price pledged me to fraternity in some hazy night 40 some odd years ago or whatever, and then later served as president of my fraternity, so I have great respect. Jim Scott, who called me about a half an hour ago, sounded like he'd just gotten out of bed, but he's here and I'm proud of him. Buzzy Law, there's several people that I know from a long, long time ago, so it's a pleasure to be here, and I get no pressure from you guys, on the front. So when I got the invitation to do this, I thought this would be a lot of fun, and what I want to do is I put together just a 142 slide deck, so we'll be here for a bit. No, it's just 6 or 7 slides, and what I want to do is sort of take you through this transformation that we have underway at Vonage, because I think it's really a cool story in terms about how to reposition a company and transform it. And so this is clearly a work in process. but I think it's sort of a lot of lessons that are embedded in it that are, I think, fun to take note of. So let me just sort of, jump in real quick, and I'll give you sort of, kind of the treetops view, and then I'm happy to take questions and talk about it a bit. So what we're trying to do at Vonage, everyone knows Vonage, from this kind of the woohoo songs. We all kind of grew up in those commercials. The company spent $2 billion in television advertising defining the residential VoIP space, voice over IP, back in 2001. Come 2008, as the smartphone proliferation had accelerated, home phone usage is in decline. 10 years ago, if I had sat in a group like this and said, who has a cell phone? Not everyone would have raised their hand, but who had a home phone? Everybody obviously raised your hand. Today, that's flipped meaningfully. And so here you had a company that in 2008 peaked in terms of its revenue in the business that it created, the residential VoIP space. And when I joined in 2014, we were in our 6th year of consecutive revenue decline. So it was absolutely clear that this company had to catch a faster train, unequivocally. What we've been able to do so far is to move from our roots as that residential VoIP provider. And again, people think about VoIP as this new technology and stuff, and it was back in the day, but right now, most of the communication space is VoIP. So the underlying technology is not particularly relevant. What is relevant now is that, particularly in the business communication space, where the software that would run your telephony and now what is called your unified communications, because it's not just the phone, it's integrated, it's unified with messaging, with video, with presence, with team collaboration and such. Those systems now sit in the cloud, and that's precisely, they've moved from premise-based, sitting as a proprietary piece of software, sitting on a piece of hardware in the closet, now moved to the cloud, and that's exactly what we do. And so we've been able to take the business, which was zero in the business space just a few years ago, and now it itself is over $600 million. It's the majority segment of a now greater than $1 billion revenue business. Quick snapshot, sort of at the treetops level. I think this is the interesting point right here. We've spent about $1 billion in acquisitions, about 80% of which is cash, over the last 4 years in order to do this. And what's important about that is many times when a company has been in 6 years of revenue decline like we were, you've so exhausted your resources. The way I like to characterize it, you got no bullets left in your gun, which really is cash. You've got no money in which to transform with. So most businesses in need of a transformation fail because they don't have either the ability to do sort of the DNA, the cultural shift, or just the money in order to do it. What we've been very fortunate to do here is we've been able to restructure the consumer business, which is in the orange, and while it is in decline, and that decline, which again predates this, goes all the way back to its peak in 2008, has absolutely continued. But one thing that you may note, you never see those commercials anymore. And the reason is, again, the company was spending $200 million a year in television advertising in order to try to hold on to this consumer business. And the way I like to describe it in sort of the need for a transformation is, don't go out there and invest trying to defy gravity. Meaning, this was coming down. Our kids are not going to have home phones. This is coming down. Don't try to get in front of that by investing $200 million in media trying to stop that slide. Acknowledge it and shift. And quite frankly, that's why I think you need new CEOs every once in a while, because my predecessor, a fellow from Atlanta, a very smart guy, but he was baked in this strategy, and it's very difficult to switch your strategy. And that's why a couple years from now, somebody's going to come along and fire me, because I'm going to be all tied up in what I created. So it's important to get rid of us every few years. The other key thing is the profitability metrics. So back in 2013, still a decently profitable business, operating profit of $110 million, and look, we've been improved the operating profit to $180 million. What's critical about that is that $180 million, that improved consolidated profitability, has happened after funneling tons of dough from the consumer business into the business segment. So, and remember I said before, we've done $1 billion in acquisitions, about $800 million of which have been in cash. We needed a balance sheet in order to fund those acquisitions. So generating greater OIBDA was critical to do that, and that's why we've been managing to a higher OIBDA. Now, the key thing is this transformation is in the blue. So we go from a dead stop in the business segment to now it being 60% of the revenue base, growing at a composite 23% rate in service revenue. And we've created along the way, if you sort of jump in terms of stock market value, we've been able to take a business that really was just a value investor's annuitization of a cash flow stream and now begun to think of us as a growth story. Now, we're a long way to go because we're still not a pure play. We're still a confusing story. We're still evaluated by the equity analysts generally on as a sum of the parts basis, meaning that they look at the consumer revenues or the consumer profitability and say, let me give you a multiple of earnings on that, while they tend to look at the business side and look at that as you know, the shorthand is a revenue multiple. Now, when I think about pulling off this transformation, I like to think about one of our competitors. And I always say it'd be easier to be CEO of that competitor than Vonage, because that competitor kind of grew up from an acorn to an oak tree in one code base, one culture, one team, all like. That's not the way we did it. We couldn't do it that way. We had to do it through acquisition. So the challenges are in acquisition is, you know, integrations, not just technical integrations, cultural integrations, market perception integrations. You've got to develop your brand along the way. Remember, we spent $2 billion over 10 years telling the market we were something that now we're not. And so how do you take this almost iconic brand and shift it? And that's, again, a work in process. But I think we're making good progress on it. And the beauty about the way the numbers look right now is there's an enormous value unlock when you move from the complexity of beginning a transformation where people are appropriately skeptical, because most of them fail, to demonstrating now that the growth segment is the majority. That only happened in Q3 of 17. Q3 of 17 is when the lines crossed. So the consumer business continues to decline at sort of a low teens rate, while the business segment is growing in a mid-20s rate. But when it was this, or even that, you could stand on your head, you couldn't grow this fast enough to compensate for the orange shrinking to give yourself consolidated organic revenue growth. When I mean organic, I mean excluding acquisitions. So that's been the big challenge, and I think that's been a lot of the value unlock, because now the market can see it. You know, you can talk to your blue in the face about what you're trying to do, but there's an inherent skepticism in the particularly in the public markets, again, because most folks fail. So it's an interesting chart, and I tend to tell people that this transformation, this transformation is sort of happened in 3 steps. What we've done is we've gone from consumer to business. I like to put a big check mark there and say that's done. Now, this is still an incredibly important segment because it generates a ton of profitability, because remember, we pulled the marketing dollars out of it. But now we're transforming from where we were as an SMB company, now moving up. And the way I think about it, and this is the conversation I want to have where the future of communications are, is from an applications company to a software company. Meaning, applications are obviously written from software, but the point is that for 25 years, those who have been involved with enterprise software, we bought something that did something. It's a HR system, ERP system, supply chain system, whatever. That world of enterprise software, the delivery model has changed. It's moved from somebody handing you a gold master that you put in a piece of hardware on site, and the delivery model has now moved to the cloud. So everybody understands that, but at the end of the day, it's still enterprise software. You're still buying generally some sort of monolithic solution that does that thing that you're looking for. The world's moving now to programmable software, where the actual application itself is programmable. Let me explain that for a second. If I'm a 100-person business and I've got, let's say I'm a retailer and I got 20 stores, 100 employees, I got 5 employees per store. All day long, I want to move that premise-based phone system. It's more complicated than that, but think the phone system, or people refer to it as the PBX. I want to move that to the cloud. We do that all day long. But folks need communications completely unrelated to the telephony solution, to the enterprise telephony solution, or the contact center solution, if you call the help desk. Those big applications still exist. Those big use cases still exist. But look at the example like Uber. Uber is a mobile booking service. It has nothing to do with communications, right? You know, its job is to put, you know, passenger and driver together, and it makes a cut of that transaction. But if driver and passenger can't find one another, what happens? You can call the driver, or the driver calls you, or you can text one or the other. What's happening is taking our solutions, and actually one of our competitor solutions, communications functionality is programmed in to Uber, has nothing to do with enterprise telephony, has nothing to do with the contact center. It's simply a piece of communications technology that enables that. And the number that gets spawned, that you see, maybe in the 404 or, you know, area code, and you think it's the driver's number, and it's absolutely not. It's a proxy number that hides the identity of the driver and hides the identity of the passenger. And why? The last thing that Uber could permit is you knowing the driver's phone number, for fear that you'll pick the phone up and call the driver and say, hey, I'll pay you 10 bucks off the books. Come pick me up in an hour. And I don't want the driver knowing my daughter's phone number, certainly. So this proxy number use case is how you program in communications in order to create something new. It's basically to make an application, Uber, better. And again, their revenue model says if passenger doesn't find driver, they don't make their money. So they have to have that communications into it. That's where the world's going. And so the way I think about the communications business is where we've grown up in, think of the trends. You had premise-based applications. And communication is just one of them. I mean, so SR, you know, ERP systems, HRS systems, whatever. You know, premise-based systems, that's moved to the cloud. Communications actually been a laggard. It's moved to the cloud later than everything else. Think about the CRM space, or the Salesforce automation space that Salesforce.com came around and redefined as the CRM space. It moved to the cloud 20 years ago and pretty much crushed all the premise-based folks. Communications has been later to the party, and I think some of that's just because it's so sort of core and so sort of basic utility. It's, you know, one of these things, if it ain't broke, don't fix. So it's just moved more later. But just like you buy that application that is, you know, that CRM system or that human resource system or what have you, you're still buying a standalone application. What's happening in communications is it's all going to get programmed in. Meaning, if everybody here was on your own favorite internet-connected device. Let me go back to VoIP for a second. Remember, communications, VoIP, voice over IP, it's no longer a, communications is no longer a proprietary thing going down, you know, the old copper line network. It's now simply an application that goes across the internet. Voice does it, messaging does it. You know, think of iMessage, Apple, you know, iPhone to iPhone, FaceTime to FaceTime. All the modes or channels of communications are simply applications that go across the internet. And so what's going to happen is if everyone in the room were on your own favorite device, so, you know, Jim's on a cell phone, and Jim Scott's on an iPad, and Buzzy Law's on a computer, and you're doing whatever. You know, someone's on the Salesforce app, someone else is working on an Excel spreadsheet, a Google sheet, you're in Gmail, you're in whatever, you're on a website. What you'll be able to do is click to communicate. And that functionality, that piece of communications will be woven into that underlying URL and that website or that application. What that means is, you know, today we think about communications, it has to be tethered to a physical device. Now the landline phone, think about that as sort of the kind of representation of that. You're tethered to it. And so you can't really, in your mind, can't think of how I divorce the software from the hardware. And that, not only did you have the hardware, you actually had a proprietary network. Today, sometimes we refer to it as POTS, plain old telephone service. But now it's not a proprietary network. Now it's simply an application that goes across the internet. So now if I'm on a device, if I'm on my phone, Marty took my phone. If I'm on a phone, I don't think this is a phone anymore. This is not a phone. What is this? This is a speaker and a microphone that happens to get on the internet. So's your iPad. So's your computer. Hell, it could be your refrigerator. It doesn't matter. All it is, it needs a speaker and a microphone and ability to get on the internet. So from within the whatever you're using that device for, whatever software you're in, Microsoft Excel, a website, a Google Sheet, doesn't matter. You're going to have the ability to click to communicate. And the mode of communication, the channel, do I want to do it by video? Do I want to do it by voice? Do I want to do it by messaging, chat, what have you, is simply going to be a function of personal preference and the limitations of the hardware. Meaning, if this device, this has a camera, if it didn't have a camera, well, I'm certainly not doing video. The limitations of the hardware. If I'm on a device that doesn't have a speaker and a microphone, it's just a typing, just a text-in device, well, I'm not doing video or audio. I'm only going to do some sort of typing interface. So what we're driving to is this notion of programmable communications so that it's woven into everything. And when you think about it also, there's a lot of software applications out there that are trying to be your home page, if you think about it for a second. So Google, that's obviously where I came from, G Suite is trying to be your home page, your portal. So I can be on Drive, I can be in Gmail, I can be in Google Sheets, Docs, or Slides. It's my home page. I'm working in it all day long. Why do I leave that environment and go over here on my cell or on my landline phone to make a call? There's a speaker and a microphone, and it can get on the internet, and this is simply an application that goes across the internet. So what you're seeing increasingly is the notion of what they call a soft phone, which is just embedded into whatever you're doing on that, in this example, that PC or Mac, in order to communicate. That's where it's all going. And what's interesting about that is if you're in the home page, for instance, you're in Salesforce as an example, because just like Microsoft wants to be your portal, wants to be your desktop, Salesforce certainly does as well. But if you're in that home page and now you're communicating from within that home page, within that portal, what's the information that is known about you, about this visit, the last visit, the last communication and such, and now the ability to stitch that all together in real time so that now you have more intelligent interactions where gone will be the day when I'm on Delta's site and I'm 10 minutes into booking a flight and I have a problem. So what do? I'm on their digital store, right? Gone are the days of the travel agent. So I'm on their store. I got a problem. So what do? Stop my digital interaction. I pick the phone up, call them, and what do? I start over. That's what we're accustomed to. I start over because the context of what I was doing is lost. But in the future, what will be when you click to communicate, the context, understanding the itinerary will be carried forward. Or if I'm on that website, I like to cycle, and I'm looking at a red bicycle and I hit click to communicate, it intelligently understands that I'm looking at a red bicycle and routes me to the appropriate expert in the company. Or it understands my last 10 interactions with the company where I was complaining about this, that, or the other, and it understands to route me to the right supervisor. All sorts of things that make more intelligent interactions. That's where communications is going, and that's exactly what we're driving. So, thank you very much. I'm available for questions. Yep.
We have microphones, so if you will raise your hand and speak into the microphone.
Alan, you talked about that you do have a competitor out there. I'm sure you
Yep.
have several, but could you talk about the competitor? What are your competitive advantages over them, and then what's your end game?
So, great question. So the way the market has evolved, first let me answer it this way. The way the market has started has said, let's take the principal use cases, and now that becomes an industry segment. And those segments used to be prem-based, on-premise, and now they've moved to the cloud. So, you know, for years you've had, let's say, you could get your phone system, your PBX, from Avaya or Cisco or just a whole variety of folks, and now that's moved to the cloud. That has now become a category referred to as UCaaS, Unified Communications as a Service. The acronyms that I'm about to go through will drive you nuts. Unified Communications as a Service. Then you have folks that are the actual contact center. That's been prem-based, some of the same vendors, Genesys, Interactive Intelligence, also Cisco, Avaya, things like that. Premise-based hardware now has moved to the cloud. That's called CCaaS, Contact Center as a Service. More recently, in this realm of programmability, now there's a new acronym that's entered called CPaaS, Communications Platform as a Service, which is, I'm now going to have I apologize in advance for the jargon, but a microservices architected platform, basically an API platform, generally sitting on a public cloud infrastructure. So it's no longer running on data centers. It's sitting on, you know, a public cloud infrastructure like Amazon Web Services or GCP or Azure or what have you. And my focus on the programmability is selling like the Uber example. And so we have very specific competitors in the CPaaS market, which has grown like a weed. There's a company named Twilio, which is a rocket ship, very successful company. They're about 2.5 times our size. We're number 2 in the world at Twilio in that piece. And then in the UCaaS side, there's our closest competitor is a company named RingCentral, and they're a bit bigger than us, but growing faster. They're doing better. Their sales execution is better than ours is today, which is very focused just on UCaaS. And then this new category, and we just completed an acquisition at the end of October in the CCaaS market. Our vision for this, and so the punchline is, correct. And the punchline right now is our growth rate is pretty good, 23%, and that's an amalgam of the two, of UCaaS and CPaaS. But separately, Ring's growing a heck of a lot faster right now, and so is Twilio. This is why I go back to that comment saying it'd be a lot easier to sort of be running a company that grew up from an acorn to an oak tree in a single code base, because we've been slowed by kind of all that kind of grit in the gears that happens because it's an acquisition. Where I think we win in sort of the future play is it's converging. This nutty CPaaS, UCaaS, CCaaS stuff is all coming together, and it's simply communication software. You're still going to play in the big use cases. The PBX is moving to the cloud. That's a big use case. The contact center is moving to the cloud. That's a big use case. These are big TAMs, total addressable markets. Many, many tens of billions of dollars. And this programmable space, which is more nascent, is exploding. But we see it coming together. And we think the ability to do that, we're uniquely qualified. And I think the way we win is the following. Like, take Twilio. I have enormous respect for Twilio in terms of the programmability and how they've architected. But go back to what I talked about before about enterprise software. Those who've played in the enterprise software space for a long time know that's just a gritty game. Tough, long sales cycles, very service delivery intensive, very support intensive and the like. So you have to have the DNA as an organization to understand that. So Twilio has the architecture, in my view, and has been killing it in the programmable space. They're trying to get into the application market, and I think they'll stumble, not because they're not architected correctly, because I don't think they understand or have the DNA for the post-sale side, that gritty part of enterprise software. Compare that over to RingCentral. Man, they know the post-sale stuff as well or better than us. They've been beating us in terms of growth, but they're not architected in what I talked about before, that microservices architecture to be able to be programmable. And I think the market is unequivocally coming together, and it positions us well going forward. Sorry for that long answer, by the way. I'm just trying to use up as much airtime so the gyms don't ask me any questions.
Great. So you came from Google, as you said,
Yep.
and you mentioned this shift. So you had to come to a company that was operating very differently before you arrived. How did you change the cultural imperative at Vonage?
Okay, I'm so glad you asked that question. So much of this transformation has been a cultural shift. Because if you look, and we're based in suburban New Jersey, about an hour outside New York, the culture of the kind of the residential telephony world, if you think about it, think about AT&T and Verizon, the big guys and such. And Vonage had its elements of this, which is kind of slow moving, very hierarchical, top down, and from a decision making point of view, not particularly innovative at all. And so how do you take that and move to being this switched on, kind of my whole thing I would say, I'm trying to bring a little bit of Silicon Valley to suburbs of New Jersey. How do you become a switched on software company when that's now the mission of the company coming from that? So it's involved a great deal of things, and one big initiative we've done is, and one thing I actually kind of stole from Google, is we set an ambition to be a destination place to work. Meaning, at Google, for 15 straight years, Google clearly wins the awards as within the technology world as the #1 place to work, as the destination place to work. So how do you take this laggard and sort of this culture, which I would say is pretty antithetical to what Google does, and create it? And I thought first you have to create, everybody know the BHAG term, big, hairy, audacious goal. And let's have an ambition to be that destination place to work. Let's set our North Star to that. But that's so qualitative and it's also so personal. So being a destination place to work will mean different things to different people. So you've got to then, it's the old adage, what gets measured gets managed. You had to create programs to fulfill that ambition. Because that ambition, again, is so loosey-goosey in a sense. And so we've created a set of initiatives around rewards and recognition, culture, and growth and development. And they're just examples, like in culture as an example, just the way we've literally reconstructed. You were involved in the offices to create a better work environment. The creation of the Vonage Foundation, because particularly among millennials, corporate social responsibility is so important to people. Creating an environment of more openness, transparency, directness, honesty, and such, which is clearly not where the company came from. And then from the growth and development, the thing I did right out of the gate, and this is something, again, I stole from Larry Page at Google, was I approve every job in the company. Not the budget, obviously the budget side, but when you want to hire somebody, that, their CV and a dossier, a write-up, comes to my desk and I have to approve before you can hire that person, every salary job in the company. And I started there because the notion is I want everyone to think that there's a quality control check. I'm a huge believer, I always use the term, I want wicked smart folks coming into the company. And so I wanted there to be the talent, or excuse me, this quality control at the end, making sure that you're hiring wicked smart talent. And I bounce folks, or at least send questions back frequently. And it just, again, it creates a bit of a filter and starts to create that, a better sense that you better not just hire somebody to put a butt in a seat, that you better be thinking about someone who fits in culturally and has the skills to drive us forward. We started with that, and then we said, look, we got 2,000 employees. That's like 300 managers, if you think about it. You're sort of a 1 to 6, 1 to 7, span. Folks don't know what great looks like, so let's teach them. And so we created a program called Manager Essentials, which is, again, training people to understand what great looks like. And then in more senior levels in the organization, we have something called the Emerging Leaders Program, which is, and then even further up, something called the Accelerated Leadership Development Program. Both of them are effectively executive MBA programs. So we've done a lot of things around growth and development, but it's a challenge. Culture is a challenge, and I would tell you today that if you look at our ENPS, our Employee Net Promoter Score, it's still very low. And I see it as this incongruity between why the hell is our ENPS so low, and we're doing all these, empirically, we're doing all these wonderful programmatic things. And I think the answer is, and I just had a global leadership offsite last week, I think the answer is we're changing so fast that the transformation to some people, they're feeling they're getting transformed too. it's, I characterize it as, like being lashed to the outside of a wheel. Sometimes you're at the top of that wheel basking in the sun, and sometimes you feel like you're getting ground into the ground. So if you're somebody who was in the consumer side of the world, and that's obviously been, downsized meaningfully, you may feel like you're getting ground to the ground. And so we got to get through this culturally. And so it's ongoing. And again, you take something that was a single location pretty much in New Jersey. And again, I inherited the first acquisition, which actually was based here. It was a company named Vocalocity. We have 400 employees here, and we're hiring as well up on Windy Hill. So we have 400 employees here. It's tough enough to create culture in a single location. Think about now having done 8 acquisitions and now having a global footprint and doubling the size of the workforce. So it's hard. It's hard. So by no stretch of the imagination are we done. Yeah.
You talked about what's next, PAS, CAS. You used the Delta example and the red bicycle.
Yeah.
When the next CEO, she or he, comes along, what's after what's next?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, I feel like we have filled our gaps. So I was pretty public out there saying, and we've done 2 acquisitions this year. One's in the video space and one's in the contact center space. And we were pretty public saying we had 2 holes and we filled now both. So I think we've got the piece parts. Will we remain independent as a public company? You never know. We're a public company. We could get, somebody could buy us. We're taking all offers. No, so we're a public company, but so I think what will happen is so much of the value in this world is being created in platform businesses, and so we will be a full platform business. Meaning, if you think about AWS, it's a platform. The Twilio example, it's a platform. Interesting. Those who are familiar with Salesforce.com, Salesforce.com actually started as a platform too early, because that's a much more nascent sort of model these days. And they said, well, crap, people weren't they weren't eating the ice cream. And so they then created the application around Salesforce. But at their core, under the covers, it's a platform company. I think we will be a communications platform company. And the way I describe it to my teams, I want to be the most open, API accessible global communications platform, which means that there's that network effect. It says if I can be tied in, if I can be easily written into everybody else's environment, because remember, communications does have to tie into all those other systems that have nothing to do with communications, but you want it to be able to tie into your HRS system, your ERP system, your Salesforce system, things like that. I think that you're going to see growth way in excess of where we are, because the move to programmability and even the move to cloud, both are early stage. And even the United States is actually further advanced. The United States and a couple other markets in the world, the UK, Australia and such, are further advanced in this. But as the world begins to catch up, I think you're going to see this very profound shift, which is going to drive us forward. Now, I could envision at some point one of the big, what I refer to as the Goliaths out there, the huge tech companies, the huge web companies, who do control your eyeballs, because they are your homepage, could sit back and say, well, hey, I've got you here for your mail and your storage and your productivity applications. This new Voice Media we just bought, they already interface in with Salesforce, so now the contact center functionality sits under the sales and service cloud of Salesforce. The unified communications side could sit underneath as well, because you could see that just being sort of extensible functionality that the folks who are already your homepage for your productivity stuff that you do every day could want this, because it's just more value capture of the user. So you could see someone like that stepping up and buying the company, I think, but that would be down the road. That's just conjecture. Yeah. Oh.
Hey, Alan, two questions. Would love to hear your business, the business growth. What outside of the U.S., the global market?
Yep.
You know, certain areas. Is there any areas you want to penetrate further? Second question is, and I apologize to all the business students, EBITDA. You know, I asked Jim. He and I, we're EBITDA, obviously. Can you maybe just
it's
give
a
us
new
a little?
SEC term.
Okay, love a little color on that too, if you don't mind.
Here, let me just take that. It's EBITDA, basically. Why I always tell you, OIBDA or OI, it's operating income before depreciation and amortization. We're all accustomed to EBITDA. It happens to be now an SEC they begin are pushing us to these OIBDA terms. And I'm not completely sure I understand why, but I think about OIBDA as EBITDA. It's the same thing. Internationally, it goes a little bit by those segment. If I go back to those, the as a services, the segments, the CPaaS side is actually that company we bought 2.5 years ago. They were very focused outside the United States, and we continue to be much stronger in EMEA and really strong in APAC. So we have 7 actually, we've opened, in my tenure, 5 offices. Now we have 7 in APAC. And that's grown. Actually, APAC grew this year for us on a decent base, 100% growth rate. So it's exploding. The new acquisition, New Voice Media, happened to be a company that was initially based in London, and they're really strong in EMEA. And now they're trying to penetrate the United States. If you think about Vonage as the acquirer of those companies, we're sort of the force multiplier for them coming to the U.S. because we've got brand, distribution. We have 110,000 business customers, almost all of which are in the United States, or a large percentage in the United States. And so the theory, we're still in process of executing on it, is that we can accelerate them by bringing them to the States. That's a lot easier than I thought. You let me off the hook really good.
Let you off.
Okay, I'm not going to let him off
Oh,
either,
shit.
because I've got a real serious question. Could you explain to this group what we drank at the ATO house in the early 1980s that created so many leaders and entrepreneurs?
I don't know, but we should feed that, Ben, to these students here, because there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them. The answer would be a lot. Yeah. I knew that was coming.
Thanks.
I knew that was coming. I was dreading it. I kept looking this way.
Not understanding your business-to-business segment that well, I'll put the question out
Me
there. You
neither, really, honestly.
You can punt this if you want to, but your approach, or what you see in the future of the national approach to consumer data privacy versus opportunities to monetize information flow and metadata that you may handle working for other businesses.
Wow. He asked us the question about data privacy and, in particular, PII data. So we stay very clear of. I'm not worried about those issues for us today. I think it's a big issue for kind of the entire technology world in terms of privacy, because we're going to have we all have, this is where we're coming to, is everyone will have a 10-digit identifier called your phone number. Think about it. And so if that phone number, regardless of channel means mode of communication, whether you communicate to that company, kind of them to you or you to them, they're capturing information about you. And what's happening right now is your personal identity can now be reliably, probabilistically, not deterministically, but probabilistically can be linked to your business identity. So my personal Gmail address, amasarek123@gmail, can be linked to alan.masarek@Vonage, which then can pull up the firmographic data that says this is a company of 2,000 employees and $1 billion in revenue based in such and such, operating under this SIC code. that then can, see that, oh, this person is also CEO, and the last 10 interactions this person has had with the company are such and such. That's the world we're driving to. You can see all the sort of overt examples about it where Google will actually read your mail in an automated fashion to understand what to serve you in ads. So this privacy space is the capability is there so far in advance of sort of the legislative permission, and now you have legislation always is way behind capability, that it's going to be, I think, a very dicey area, having little to do with us, I think, for a long time to come. And I think how it all shakes out, and remember, you have a very, very different view of the world based upon administration, whether you might have a Democratic or Republican administration here, and clearly the EU has a completely different view of privacy and a much stricter view of privacy, and GDPR with, you've got to have, keep data within the country and all those sorts of things, and the ability to anonymize my data, the right to be unknown when I search. So I don't have any answers, but all I know it's going to be challenging it'll be even more challenging going forward, I think. Yeah. Okay.
So telecommunications has traditionally been a regulated industry, certainly in the U.S. and other countries. It's actually owned by the government. So how big a challenge are regulatory hurdles for you guys, and where you see Vonage needing to go in the future?
Actually, it's interesting you ask that question, because it really is on the exact heels here of legislation, or sort of, regulation is slower than capability. So my answer to that is follow the money, meaning that if I'm the state of Pennsylvania and I used to charge telecommunication tax in the form of something called USF, which they do, I need that for my budget. But I'm not doing telecommunications any longer. I'm not involved in the packet switch telephone network. Why should, you can go to a website in Japan for free. All you're doing is paying whomever's giving you access to the web, whoever that ISP is, that's giving you sort of the bandwidth connectivity. You can go to a website in Japan, but if you call Japan in the old way, you pay. There's a tariff to it. Why is visiting an application called a website different than an application called VoIP? And so what you have is the taxing authorities, they need the money. And so they're trying to describe or define the categories even broader. Again, that's another one which is going to be kind of the Wild West for a while, because they need to fund those state governments. So I don't have clear answers for it. We pay today in 3,000 taxing districts. So it's a big cost administratively in order to handle it. But you can't just say, well, I'm not going down the network anymore. I'm going down this way. Therefore, I'm free and clear, because the states tend to have a different view of it. Yes, ma'am. I'll get stumped by one of our scholars.
Oh. No. So with the changes that Vonage has gone through, and as you've talked about some of the changes that you see coming up, and how the culture of the company has had to change, what are some ways that you encourage innovation at all levels for your employees?
Great question. So we part of that same notion of creating a destination place to work was I reset the value statements 4 years ago when I got here, and one of those was to what we refer to as innovate relentlessly. There were 6 value statements. We actually just did a big survey of our employees, and came to realize that 6 was too many. And so we've basically come back and we've redefined what we call the Vonage personality, which actually goes back to our days as a, from the residential VoIP space, as the disruptive innovator. So it's the core personality of the company, and then we've put on top of that a set of values which has to do with customer centricity, people and culture, and accountability and integrity. And so the notion about innovation is not, hey, once a year let's have a hackathon and do some cool stuff. You know, that happens obviously, but the notion of innovation is not only an engineer building a cool app that makes things better. The culture of innovation is everywhere. Because what I always talk about when you're trying to do a transformation, most people come to work, this is what I think about it, most people come to work and they try to do what they did yesterday just a little bit better. That's not innovation. Innovation is step function changes. And so it could happen in the folks who do payroll processing, you know, because all too often in big companies, you know, why do you do that? Well, that's the way I've always done it. That happens, I mean, it just sort of seeps into people's mindset. So we're trying to encourage that culture with all sorts of goes back to the culture stuff, the recognition about those who are breaking, you know, old paradigms. And I'm very happy to say all the time, one big thing about innovation is to admit, I always say all decisions are wrong. All decisions are wrong. It's simply the time frame. You know, at some point, the decision you made is wrong, and you got to revisit it. So if you have that culture to revisit, even in my office, and say, well, man, I messed that one up, and go back and fix it, then you're rewarding a culture of innovation. And then there's all sorts of, again, very specific recognition programs we do, total company. We have a recognition program called Vonage Applause, which is, again, a formal way to recognize people who are just doing things differently in step function ways. Yeah.
I would like to say thank you for not using a bunch of acronyms and jargon and making this understandable for someone who is not familiar with
The
the
only
industry.
way I even barely understand it myself.
Secondly, it's clearly you're very passionate about what you do and have
About everything.
Yeah, full speed. Keep chopping, right?
Yeah.
So my question for you is, what, as you have walked us through kind of the historical journey, how you've pivoted, moved in from market to market, what would you say is the thing you are most proud of with respect to your organization?
That's a great question also. These are good questions. Not to sound trite, I actually look, I'm actually proud of I'm proud of that. I really am. I'm proud of, I'm somebody who's obviously very passionate about a lot of things, and I hold myself to incredibly high expectations. A lesson I learned recently is I don't celebrate often enough. I'm like, okay, we got that thing done, let's go do the next thing. And one of the things a lesson I need to tell myself is we need to celebrate more, because as much as I can drive people and say, I'm dissatisfied with that growth rate as an example, we have done an incredibly significant transformation that almost always fails. And so I'm proud of that as an organization. I want to get, people say, okay, you bought 2 companies this year, what's next? And I'm like, I'm begging you not to do another one, because I feel like we do need to sort of absorb, get simpler, execute better, now that we got the piece parts in place, celebrate what we've done a little bit better, because I drive us pretty hard. It's a great question.
Hey, so I had one quick, 2 questions. Kind of doing all these acquisitions, what are the biggest challenges from an integration perspective? And then with Cisco acquiring BroadSoft and Vonage Enterprise being on the BroadSoft platform, how does that impact the Vonage platform going forward? And does it at all?
Well, Blake's just, by the way, Blake's joining us in the Corp Dev group Monday. And I just met him for the first time this morning. The toughest part of acquisitions is the integration. It always is, and that integration is as much cultural as anything, and it requires a directness, a crispness of decision making, which can be really uncomfortable. You have to make the call. You have to make the call of what is this organization going to look like the day after closing? Who reports to who? who's gone, who just comes in under a transition contract. There are so many details that can be dropped that typically do, because those decisions tend to muddle along. And so my experience, and I've done 7 acquisitions here, and I've done a whole bunch in my previous roles, it's about that integration and sort of knowing where everybody is going to be the day after closing. Now the culture can mess that up worse than anything. I just got back last night from London, where most of the New Voice Media folks, the company we just closed on, are based. And starting with their CEO, the cultural integration has been marvelous from just the earliest day. You could just tell. And there was another acquisition we still are struggling with the cultural integration. And it doesn't mean that one's good or one's bad. Matter of fact, the company that I'm referring to, where it's still a challenge, is they had an incredibly tight culture, but it was super insular. And so for them, it was almost like a family. And it wasn't scalable. It wasn't scalable, but it certainly was comfortable. And so now you have to tear something down, which they have such a familiarity with, to make it more scalable. And that's been hard, and that's a work in process. And there's been a lot of changeover of people as a result. What was your other question? Sorry.
Around
BroadSoft.
Cisco and BroadSoft.
So what Blake's referring to is when we went into the business space, the first acquisition was here in Atlanta, a company named Vocalocity. Vocalocity focused on really what we refer to as the micro segment, fewer than 10 employees. And had been a very successful company, and many of you may know their leadership team, a fellow named Wayne Kellum, local guy, super smart CEO. We stayed in that micro segment, I think, too long. And and this comes back to the BroadSoft thing. So we were in that micro segment, and when we rebranded Vocalocity as Vonage, we killed it. We just took off like we were, like this, like a cannon, because we had so much brand authority in that small. Let me back up. You think about, John Smith, homeowner, buying one phone for one home is almost identical to the lead gen and sales motion of John Smith, small business owner with 3 employees. And so when you rebranded Vocalocity as Vonage, you saw this tripling of lead flow at the top of the funnel, and we just took off. And so we enter this UCaaS market, and we have formidable competition, but in 2014 and 15, we were the fastest growing company out there organically. And we probably sort of, we're patting ourselves on the back a little too hard, kind of feeding off that trough, because it works so well for us. And our competitors, RingCentral and others, had to abandon the low end of the market because they didn't have the domain authority in the brand. Therefore, they couldn't source the leads as inexpensively as us. So they started up market. Well, that product that Vocalocity had was only suitable for the very low market. So we bought 3 companies, 3 service providers who used as their underlying soft switch something called BroadSoft that now Cisco bought, and cobbled that together as our upmarket offering. And that's been a tough set of integrations, or a tough operational challenge for us. And along the way, we completely rewrote what was the old Vocalocity software stack. And now our own software will actually, the way I described it, will push BroadSoft off the page. Meaning in 2019, we'll actually quit. We'll still have, BroadSoft customers for forever, but we'll only be selling our own stuff. But that's been, again, at the moment, market's moving up. We don't have an offering. You're a public company. The way I say, you got to feed the revenue beast. The expectations of the market, and we went after it through acquisition. It's been a big challenge. But now that Cisco's bought BroadSoft, it has no bearing on us because now we're on our own code base anyways. But that's been hard. Any last questions? Well, thank you all very much. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
Alan, terrific job. I'm going to present to you a nice red and black sculpture.
Deal. All right.
To commemorate you being here today. Thank you for all the things you shared with us today. And go Dogs. That's right. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks.
So Blake, congratulations! You made the check mark there on getting approved for a hire. So I'm glad we could help you with that connection. Interesting enough, so my students in our leadership class each year, one of the requirements, they write a paper on a company that's gone through a transition successfully. And so I have to apologize to my two students. I didn't tip them off that Vonage would be a great example, but maybe next year's class. But thank you for everything that you shared today. Such a great lesson for all of us on transition and change and how to manage it successfully. So really appreciate you being here today and for how well you represent the Terry College. So thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
If we have not paid for your parking, we would love to do so, so we can validate that on the way out. I hope that everyone has a wonderful Thanksgiving holidays. Remember, we will not meet in December, but I will be providing Economic Outlook at the Georgia Aquarium on December the 6th. I hope you will join us for that, and look forward to seeing you back in January. Thank you.